Welcome to the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast, brought to you by Arihanta Institute. Listen to top figures in the fields of Jain studies, religious studies, vegan studies, and social justice discuss pressing issues of everyday relevance. Together, let's move beyond the realm of personal spiritual growth and connect philosophy, religion, and spirituality to the important task of caring for the well-being of society. Learn about your world and how to change it on the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast.
Welcome to the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast. I'm Christopher Jain Miller, and today I'm joined by my colleague Johannes Beltz at the Museum Rietberg. We're going to be speaking with Johannes about a recent exhibition. It seems so recent, but it was actually about 3 years ago at the museum, and about which he wrote a chapter for our volume, Engaged Jainism. So welcome to the podcast, Johannes. We look forward to hearing about it from you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris, for having me today.
It's indeed our pleasure. And before we get started and dive into this, I would like our audience, for those who don't know you, many do, but for those who don't, to know a little bit about your background, your bio, what you've studied, and your current position at the museum, and how you've worked through being at the museum for so long now. Would you like to share some of your background with them?
Sure. So I grew up in East Germany and studied theology. So this was before the Iron Curtain came down. And for people like me having, being interested in something which goes, beyond Europe, larger, non-European religions, cultures, it was very difficult to make this as a profession in East Germany. So I ended up studying theology like some of my colleagues and friends. This was a niche area where people finding it interesting to study, and there was a certain academic freedom. And then when the Iron Curtain came down, I changed and added religious studies, anthropology, Indology to my area of expertise. And went for my first field trip to India in the 90s and started a PhD working on India's Dalits and the caste system. And then finished my PhD and worked for a research project at Heidelberg University. And on the field trip to Orissa, to India, I met some people who guided me towards the Museum Rietberg in Switzerland and Zürich, and pointed out that there's an interesting museum and asked me what I would like to do after my PhD. And I was sure that I didn't want to stay at the university. I wanted to do something different. And I did an internship at the Museum Rietberg in 2001, and I stayed. And I became assistant curator and head of the curatory board, and finally deputy director. And I'm still enjoying my work here. And I work with I'm the curator of South and Southeast Asian art at the museum, beside my directorship. And I've been doing exhibitions and research on South and Southeast Asia for decades, and I still enjoy my job a lot.
Wonderful. Yes. And I know that this Jain exhibition, the Being Jain exhibition, was just one of many engagements that you've had with South Asian and Southeast Asian art. So
religion. So having studied Indian religions, Indology, religious studies, so many of my exhibitions turn around religious themes. This is also due to the fact that if you visit the Museum Rietberg collections in South Asia, a lot of the stone or bronze material is related to religious context, ritual objects, temple sculptures. So the link to religion is immediate. So that's why a lot of my religions dealt with, a lot about my exhibitions, dealt with religious themes.
I'm remembering now, as you say that, one of the first times I visited you at the museum, that you took me immediately to see the incredible image of Urshaba, the Tirthankara, the Jinnah, as one of the really key pieces that also was in the exhibition and remains at the Rietberg. So definitely remember this religious theme running through the pieces that you showed me, as well as what was at the exhibition itself.
It was this big statue in marble was one of the objects which impressed me most when I visited the Rietberg for the first time. And I in my mind, I pointed out to some objects, and I thought I should do an exhibition about this object and around this object at some time. And I did it for the Dancing Shiva and for Ganesha and this Rishabha. It took some time, but in 2022, this exhibition happened. And actually, we had planned it earlier, much earlier, but then COVID came, and before that, some people who wanted to support and work with me, they didn't have the time, so it took a while. And what is interesting is a parallel to the former curator of Indian art, so Eberhard Fischer, that his exhibition on Jainism was one of the first exhibitions he did. So there's a continuation on working about these collections and these objects.
Yeah, this was something that I really enjoyed in your chapter, that you didn't just dive right into the Jain exhibition, even though it is the bulk of the chapter. You began by telling a little bit about the history of the Museum Rietberg's integration and work and really collaboration with the South Asian, the Indian community in Switzerland to put on various exhibitions. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that history? You mentioned Eberhard Fischer.
I think it's not about Eberhard Fischer in particular, but it's more about how I perceive the role or the job as a curator working in a museum. And we come to that, but when we talk about engaged curation, what is curation? Curation is engaging with people, objects, and ideas, or people, their ideas, opinions, stories, and objects. And if you take this seriously, it's, these people, that there are multiple people you engage with in a museum. It's not only your audiences, you spoke about the Indian diaspora, it's your donors, sponsors, it's the politicians, the mayor of Zürich, it's your academic community, your peers. It's a multiplicity of people you are working with and communicating and doing exhibition. Of course, the audience is the largest of it. And you deal with stories, with ideas going back and the history of the museum, the archives, and you write yourself a new history and add a chapter to the ongoing storytelling about art and culture, which happens in an institution like a museum. And you deal with objects. You add new interpretations, new ideas. You project on objects, you analyze them, and you interpret them, and you offer new horizons of understanding and engaging with these objects. So I think what is interesting about the Rietberg is that it's a kind of the DNA of this institution, that the museum has been collaborating with the communities and experts of those countries from where these objects come from. So there's a long tradition of collaboration with India, which started with Eberhard Fischer in the 70s, and he co-authored numerous books on South Asian art and culture, and curated and co-curated numerous exhibitions where his colleagues also were always part of it. So this kind of, we were, as a curator, you have to work with with your multiple partners, and in India, but also in Switzerland, right? So, and in particular with this Jain exhibition, we were communicating, working with Jains in India, but at the same time with the Jain community in Switzerland. So I think this is what I like most about my job, my profession as a curator, is to have these multiple partners and exciting themes and objects, which this rich museum with its collections, it offers an endless, ocean of stories and encounters and possibilities.
Well, I recall after being on the advisory board with you and getting glimpses of this as you were working with all of these stakeholders, it being sort of the inspiration for us asking you to write this chapter. So we put it in the section Social Engagement in the Diaspora, but it's so much more than that. And the title of your chapter is Engaged Curation: Challenges,
Yes.
Experiences, and Potentials from a Museum Exhibition about Jainism. And I think what you just said just really points out why this chapter is so exciting, that you've described the almost countless engagements with politicians, with members of the diaspora community, with members in India, with so many government stakeholders and more in the Swiss community. There's so many people that you're engaging with. And so rather than just calling this curation, it's a sort of practice of engaged curation. And what really stood out to me in the chapter, and maybe you could say a little bit more about what you mean by engaged curation, is that this chapter is not only interesting for scholars of Jain studies, it's interesting for the public to understand how a museum exhibition gets put together, all the things that happen behind the scenes. It's so complex, as well as, students of contemporary art, of art history, who want to understand what it means to actually put on an exhibition of that scale. So I don't know if you had more you want to say about
Yeah,
engaged
absolutely.
curation.
And I think this term engaged, I mean, this is valid, I think, for many jobs or positions or work areas, similar. So, and engaging means, in terms of working with the communities to allow them to participate, for example. So you make, if you work on the Indian diaspora or the Jains in Switzerland or on Buddhism, and we have several examples, several exhibitions which we did where we involved the local communities and the communities in India to contribute to the exhibition. So we try to bring them in with their ideas and opinions. And, with the Arihanta Institute, we collaborated and got these series of interviews, which allowed our audience to meet and some Jains from all over the world and understand better where they come from and how do they perceive themselves as Jains. So I think, a curator maybe in the 19th century could sit in his armchair and define his theme and develop some ideas in his study room and then design and write an article or a catalog. But in our days world, everything is interconnected and we are constantly challenged to communicate and to engage with people and stakeholders all the time. And I think this is what is so exciting about this curation, about curating an exhibition. And it's not easy in the sense that here curating means you have to bring in content and put it in the context of what you have so many contents, so many different opinions for this. Let's take the Jain exhibition. The biggest challenge is in doing an exhibition on Jainism in Switzerland is that you present a minority religion to an audience who is in its majority absolutely ignorant of what Jainism is in Switzerland. People have it's not present in the media. They don't know what this religion is about and why this religion is maybe significant or could offer something to the Swiss way of life or to people here. Why should Swiss people come and see the exhibition? That's the biggest challenge, right? So when you engage with people, with Jains, with scholars, you need to reflect the diversity of opinions. And you can't essentialize Jainism and define this is what Jainism is. We as a museum of art and culture, we are a secular institution. This can't be. We do not talk about the truth, what's right, what's wrong. We don't have this moral authority. What we can do is offer a glimpse into religious practices of a certain community and present the huge diversity of opinions, traditions, practices within this religious tradition to our audiences. And then we can try to make this interesting and make it relevant for our audiences. And tell our audiences, come and see it. You will learn something which might have an impact on your life. You could change. There is something we offer you don't know, and you will be happy to know more about once you have seen the exhibition.
One of the things that I found most interesting and most enjoyable about the exhibition was that almost every time I was there were also Jains there. And they weren't just at the exhibition, they were actually invited to participate in the exhibition, to showcase the exhibition alongside you. And when I listened to them speak, they, as you say, there was no essential Jainism. There were many different Jainisms and opinions, and people from in the diaspora from different parts of the world sharing their vision of what Jainism is with the Swiss public, as the Swiss public is also kind of learning and questioning them. Can you say a little bit more maybe then about, through these engagements, maybe about the exhibition's vision, the overall vision you had for this exhibition that you had set out for?
So the overall vision was, to present a kind of coherent image of what Jainism is in today's world, across continents, and a glimpse into its history. The idea was to make a statement and to make people here to learn about a religion they had never heard before, and to appreciate the ethical values and the teachings of Jainism, and to appreciate the art and which is connected with this religion. This was the ambitious goal of any curator who comes up with a niche theme or something he is excited about and he wants to share with larger audiences. So, and I wanted to make it in bringing people together on our board and looking for colleagues who help to make this project successful in the sense that it speaks out to a larger audience. We didn't want to have this exhibition just for a minority of Indologists or academic experts or art historians. It should speak to more people. So it was clear that we involved the Jain community here, and you speak about the tours, and we had several evenings, roundtable discussions with Jains and other people. It was not that we promoted Jainism, but we got into a discussion with Jains, and Jains spoke and discussed with non-Jains. It's not that we, only highlighted the Jain religion as something superior. We contextualized it and we let people discuss it. And it was, we raised also questions. Jains, I think, felt questioned at certain points, when the discussion touched on themes and areas they were not very comfortable with. So, but this was all full of respect and the wish to learn from each other and to learn about, what Jainism is today in this world. So, the interaction with the Jain community in the exhibition was a crucial, a key point, keystone of this exhibition.
Yeah, it was such a dynamic exhibition because of their presence and the presence of others that you mentioned, these stakeholders, that made it really exciting. I mean, one of the most kind of dynamic and exciting exhibitions I've been to in a long time, because there were so many things going on, and we'll talk about them now. One of the things that you mentioned in the chapter in your subtitle is 3 different categories: challenges, experiences, and potentials. And I think you're kind of touching on those right now. And I'm wondering if those parts of your chapters, the challenges, the experiences, and the potentials, are things that you might be able to elaborate on a little bit. What were the challenges, experiences, and potentials that you saw coming out of this?
I think the challenge is, the huge challenge is to make people speak about their own religion in a way that you can share this with other people and audiences. So, how to avoid, fundamentalist opinions or ideologies or opinions where, someone says something about what Jainism is and speaking about the entire Jain community, but he is not representative of that. So, how to bring in this diversity of opinions and practices, and giving everyone this a kind of same respect and place on stage. So that is definitely a challenge. How do you deal with the, Shwetambara, Gitambara fractions, then different schools of thought, opinions, people who have very strong opinions about what Jainism is and is not, and contradicting each other. So to handle this kind of cacophony of opinions and plurality of opinions, that is definitely something where you need to be very smart and smooth of not polarizing, people and getting them upset because you say something and then, the dynamic of being together is it's fragile sometimes. So and you have a Jain who talks about his religion and the intention to impress others and tell other people how beautiful and great his tradition is. But often, you see this is a staged discourse. It's a discourse of practice, which might differ from his own individual practice. So, then you get into, this is if you see all religious communities, you face the same problem, right? So that's definitely a challenge. And the other challenge I mentioned is, how do you translate something which makes totally sense and in India and South Asia or in the US? How do you translate these debates and questions and practices into Zurich and Switzerland? And how do you make people, our audiences here, getting interested? About questions of vegetarianism or salikana, and non-violence. How do you get people to react to this? That's I think an enormous challenge too. And I think that would be the other challenges are small, funding and organization and bringing loans from India to Europe. These are major logistic challenges, but I think they're comparatively small to these larger questions.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate how you have to sort of sit at the center of all of these crisscrossing engagements with people that present various experiences and challenges, and at the same time, potentials. You've mentioned the ethical system, maybe getting Swiss people to rethink about their lifestyles. And I thought that was sort of one of those potentials that came out is the Swiss people on the one hand are being asked to kind of rethink about their own ethical choices, and at the same time, they are then engaging with the Jains and questioning them and asking them about difficult questions, as you've mentioned. And I remember being there at times thinking like, wow, that's really a really good question that the Swiss audience has asked the Jain participants to answer. And sometimes it was difficult for them to answer that. And I think an overall theme of our volume, what we're trying to do, and this is why I appreciate this part of your chapter so much, is that we're trying to say, on the one hand, we see that the Jain community teaches nonviolence and it has this great ethical system and it can be very inspiring for us. And we also see that scholars and members of who are not Jain of the community might also have something to teach the Jain community as well. And it's this exchange, this engagement, I guess how we're defining engagement in the volume as a whole, is very much like the way you're describing it here at the museum.
And questioning, often if you're a practitioner of a particular tradition or religion, you have a certain opinion of what of what you're doing, of your own practice. but this probably is very selective in its you have your own opinion made, but people who question you and ask you things you are not prepared to answer because you never thought about it, and this is that's the tough thing, if to accept and not to get irritated. And how do you deal also with controversial people or opinion? I remember Gautam Adani, some Jains, Gautam, Adani, the Adani group, right? So some Jains were, promoted him as being very proud of Adani being a Jain, and then, but then at the same time, this big scandal happened at the stock market, and people started talking about Adani in a different way, and then suddenly the perception shifted, and the great super giant hero Adani became somehow controversial and was not put on the forefront anymore to promote Jainism. So these dynamics are there, and I think one has to address them and talk about these things. And food, vegetarianism, it's a very controversial theme when it comes to practices, industrial production, and then dairy business in Switzerland as well. So all these things I found very enriching. And this is what I think the potential is an exhibition, since we talked about challenges. The potential, I think, of an exhibition like Jainism is that people learn from each other. And this is what the overwhelming response, positive response to the exhibition was, that in our guest book and emails, people said, look, some of them said this was the greatest exhibition they ever saw because they learned so much and they were deeply touched, by questions about what is life, what is suffering, how to end life, what is violence, how do you deal with ethic questions in your daily life, in your daily practices. And I think that we enabled our audiences to engage with these questions also through the game, which we prepared for the exhibition. This was the biggest potential, to make people, invite them to think and rethink and argue and talk to each other. And I think we achieved quite well in doing that.
I'm glad you mentioned the game, because I was feeling like this was a good opportunity to say a little bit more about that, because the game for me, and I know for a lot of people, was a central meeting point at the exhibition. It tied a lot of things together, and it also broke a lot of ice and maybe social discomfort people may have felt it in those conversations. When you arrived at the game, it was such a fun thing, and yet also still challenged you to think in particular ways. Do you want to say a little bit more about the game and how that was a successful part?
The game is based on the snake and ladders, but we changed it at some point. We changed the rule and the logic of the game, because snake and ladders, you start from one to the goal, and you move. The snake bites you, gets you back, and the ladder you mount, and you want to win. But we changed the game rules. Everyone starts moving from square to square, but then there are certain squares where you have to answer a question. And here the trick is, it's not that you answer the question yes, right, wrong, not wrong, and you move ahead or not. The trick is that this question, you have to guess how this question is answered by your co-players. So, and these questions were all about ethics, about daily practices of eating meat, not meat, of buying in supermarkets, or eco-friendly, or how much water do you use for showering and brushing your tooth, and how often you go on vacation with an airplane. So all these ecological, environmental, important questions were there. So the point was that you could say, okay, I do it this way or that way, and you could pretend anything, but this was not our goal. We wanted you to assume what your co-players, how they would answer this question, and whether you are right or not. If you are right, then you move on. If not, you have to go back. And then automatically what happened is that these questions are discussed. You launch the question, And whether you're wrong or not, people will comment on it. We had the question, would you be ready to give one part of your salary to poorer people? We had some easy questions, but also some tricky questions, some not so, or did you cheat your partner? Some of these questions were not so easy to answer, depending on the audience with whom you're playing. The funny thing is that some people I came to know gave different answers at different occasions, so for the same question. And what we also added was the possibility that everyone could upload his own question to the game. So it became really participatory and interactive. And we had a version for kids. And I think this kind of interaction with our audiences through this game was something very new we tried in the Museum Rietberg, and I liked it a lot. So I think this was something very innovative. We haven't continued with that. We did, at some point we have in Ragamala, we also had some interactive things happening. But this kind of game, which then became part of the catalog and online, this was a unique experience. And I wonder whether we will be able to repeat that. But I really think it was for me very exciting to develop that.
It was such a fun part of the exhibition and also such a social part of the exhibition, I recall exactly.
And you met Michaela Blaser, so we recruited someone to develop this game for us. And sadly, I have to say, I was hoping that this game would make it, that we would be able to share it on a larger scale, with some game communities or with some people internationally, or we thought we could even make this game travel or have it been played in London or at some Jain functions or at some. But sadly, this didn't work. So we didn't make it for whatever reason.
The one thing I was going to say is that if people want to play the game, if people who like snakes and ladders, I still have it because you can buy it at a very reasonable price through the book, that the Being Jain exhibition book at Museum Rietberg. So go to the website and check it out, because in the back is the game board, a mini game board, and you can use your iPhone and you can actually play the game with your family. And I'll tell you, Johannes, we still play that game at home 3 years later. So I guess what I want to tell is, if anybody wants to play the Snakes and Ladders version that Johannes is talking about, it's still available, if I'm not mistaken, on the website.
Sure. No, thank you for this comment.
Absolutely.
And thank you for this advertisement for our game. And maybe in the end, I think it was not an easy exhibition. It was I had easier projects. It was challenging in many instances. But I'm very glad that we did it. And I think for the history of the museum also, it's something significant. And I'm sure, we are still screening the films, the Jain films. And I'm going to India in April, where we have a screening of the Jain films in Mumbai. So, and they were screened in Belgium and the Netherlands last year. And as a side product, a spin-off, Patrick's book has been written and published in German and has been translated into English. And a good Jain reader, very good book. Congratulations, Chris, for doing it. So there are a few things which remain, and I think that's good to see.
Absolutely. Somehow this exhibition keeps living on and on, so I appreciate that as well. I have one more question for our audiences, and a lot are not academic. This is our public podcast, and members of the community listen to it, others listen to it. And I think it's an important thing that you raise in the conclusion of your book, and it has a lot to do with your own training and exposure to what is called Engaged Buddhism, which is an inspiration for this volume. But there's some important things that I raise in the introduction when we try to compare these things, and I think you really bring them out in the conclusion of your chapter. And so I'm wondering if you can say a little bit more about how your work and your exposure to, for example, Ambedkar and engaged Buddhism, and your understanding of how radical and activist engaged Buddhism is, how does that make you respond to this idea of engaged Jainism? What is an engaged Jainism? What would it need to become something like engaged Buddhism?
So first, when I read about engaged Jainism, I found that funny and not significant. I mean, I found it, I couldn't take it seriously, but because engaged Buddhism, it's a notion, it's not a genuine term, but it's something, there's a lot what happened in the background. It's about Dalits in India, and it's about its social responsibilities. It's about equality, social equality, about social status, about exclusion, inclusion, democracy, about power relations. And of course, spirituality at some point, it's there. But the at the core is really Buddhism as a practice in our today's society, and the impact Buddhism should have and could create, and how to address social inequalities. These are really the big questions which were important for Ambedkar and other activists, which you could put in this category. There are few Buddhists, modern or contemporary Buddhists, who could be labeled as engaged Buddhists, who might not be so radical in their vision of society, but it's again, it's very much there. And I think what I observed in our discussions and engagement, interaction with the Jains around this exhibition, is a striking absence of social political issues and themes. Its entire discussion always was turning around notions of karma, ethical practices, vegetarianism, food, nonviolence, and food, vegetarianism became one of the main areas of identification of Jains, or of discussion, and this was a trope in the entire discourse, which was of major importance. So I think using or putting together engaged Jainism and engaged Buddhism, that's very difficult to compare these two entities, because they're talking about something very different. And engagement means engagement, and with society, politics, social issues, or engagement on the other side with the Jains about ethics and food habits and spirituality. And this is really not the same on the same plate. And that's why I found it funny in the beginning, because I I thought, this is bizarre. This doesn't correlate. But now, engagement means in itself, you can engage with a lot of things. So why not to call it engaged Jainism, but keeping in mind that it defines something very different. And I think if one does recognize the difference, and not put it in the same plate, then you can use these both terms, of course.
I remember when we were going through the editing process, your initial reaction to engaged Jainism, and because of that, what you just described with regard to your exposure to what engaged Buddhism meant. And so I'm really thrilled that in your chapter you highlight that distinction, because I think one of the big messages that we have in this book is that they're not the same thing. Engaged Jainism and engaged Buddhism. We take some of the methodological insights from engaged Buddhism, but it's not the same thing. And I think what we want the Jain readers to see is precisely why. And I think you just articulated very well why they are different ways of thinking about engagement, and also what the potentials, as you say in your chapter, could be if we do think about what engaged Jainism is differently, and if we start to think about it more socially, as you have so rightly pointed out, happens in Engaged Buddhism. So, yeah. Now, is there anything else you'd like to share about your chapter, the exhibition, yourself, your work? Anything I forgot to ask you, or anything that comes to your mind before we?
And I'm very curious to receive the book, which I haven't seen yet. So to unpack the parcel, and I will share this moment with you definitely. And I have to say that I enjoyed enormously working with Arihanta, and I think this was a great opportunity to have you and the platform and the website Arihanta and the support from Arihanta for this exhibition. That you were really a major partner of globalizing our and reaching out to more international, larger diaspora communities in the US. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, I hope that at some point, we might work again on something and continue our collaboration. And yeah, I after having been doing so many exhibitions, the Jain exhibition I think was something spectacular, something. Or even we didn't speak about it yet, but the fact that we got these fantastic artworks from India, which some of them for the first time in Europe, this was a magic moment to bring these objects, monumental objects, small objects, to our museum. And I think this was also something people will not forget so easily. So I cherish my memories. And so thank you again for this great collaboration, Chris.
Well, thank you, Johannes. It's been a great pleasure. And this podcast interview will be an ongoing part of our collaboration between our institutions. And if you haven't seen it yet, go to the website and look at the Being Jain, the souvenir book, and the game is in there. I want people to do that. I'll ask them to include it in the link for this podcast, so you can take a look there as well. Thank you so much to Johannes Beltz at Museum Rietberg. We look forward to working with you more in the future, and we'll be signing off now here at the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Engaged Jain Studies Podcast, brought to you by Arihanta Institute, an IRC 501c3 nonprofit California corporation. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform, or better yet, tell a friend and share it with a colleague. At Arihanta Institute, we bridge ancient wisdom with contemporary living through accessible, self-paced online courses, free events, and a first-of-its-kind Master of Arts program in Engaged Jain Studies. Visit arihantainstitute.org to learn how our curriculum spanning Jain philosophy, social justice, veganism, environmental studies, and more can enrich your understanding of timeless principles in today's context. Jai Jinendra.